Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Chemistry Industry Association of Canada's Responsible Care webinar series for 2020. We're pleased to have you join us today, and we're going to get started right away. My name is Aaron, and I'll be moderating the session today. We're very excited about our wonderful speakers that you can see here, Wendy, Julianne, and Joy from Nova Chemicals and Systemic. But before we get to introducing them, a quick little bit about the webinar series. Responsible care is the chemistry industry's response to growing societal concerns and our commitment to sustainability. There will always be new challenges facing our industry, and we must continuously improve and develop new and innovative solutions to address them. The issue of plastic pollution is no different. Today, in Canada, 86% of post-consumer plastics end up in landfills, and this equates to about 3 million tons annually. Our current approach to producing, using, and then disposing of plastics is posing a real threat to the environment, and not to mention costing us billions of dollars in lost opportunity. While plastics play an integral role in our society and in our economy, there's much work that needs to be done to stop plastics from entering landfills and leaking into our environment. And that's where industry is stepping up. Industry is helping to accelerate the transition from a linear economy for plastics, one where we take, make, and dispose of products, to a circular economy, where ultimately the waste of one process becomes the feedstock for another, and ultimately waste and pollution become eliminated. In Canada, the plastics industry has made ambitious targets for a future without plastic pollution. We've committed to 100% of plastics packaging being recyclable or recoverable by 2030, and 100% of plastics packaging being reused, recycled, or recovered by 2040. And work to achieving these goals is well on its way. But there's also a lot being done outside of Canada. Ultimately, plastic pollution is a real global challenge that requires solutions on a global scale. So today we're going to learn about one of these solutions that's being developed in Indonesia, Project STOP. Project STOP was co-created in 2017 and officially launched in 2018. And in 2019, the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, which we'll hear a little bit more about later, took on one of the cities of Project STOP and made it part of its portfolio. So a quick bit about our speakers before we get started. First off, Wendy Lomaika is a senior sustainability advisor at Nova Chemicals with more than 30 years of experience in plastics and healthcare fields and expertise in strategy, marketing, and communication. At Nova, she focuses on sustainability strategy, citizenship, and public reporting, and supports the Project STOP steering team. And Wendy is also a member of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste Technical Expert Group on Cities. So Wendy will start us off with some background on the waste dynamics in Indonesia and Project STOP. Then we'll hear from Joy Danielson. Joy is a partner at Systemic and a program manager at Project STOP, where she's working on the front line in Indonesia to build clean, circular, economically sustainable waste systems. Joy has worked in 10 countries throughout Asia and Africa using market incentives to tackle environmental challenges. She's also an author of Leave No Trace, Vital Waste System Lessons from Pioneering Organizations on the Front Line. Joy will offer us some insights on some of the challenges faced in building a sustainable waste system in the region. And then lastly, we'll hear from Julianne Trichtinger. She's an industry affairs advisor with a government relations team at Nova Chemicals. She's also held several marketing roles at Nova and has over a decade of experience in the steel and metal fabrication industries and nonprofit sectors. Julianne will share a closer look at the Project STOP city of Jembrana and the role that the Alliance to End Plastic Waste plays in that city. So thank you everyone once again for joining us and participating with us today. For those of you who just joined us, welcome to the Responsible Care webinar series. My name is Aaron, and today we have 3 speakers with us, Wendy, Joy, and Julianne, to talk to us about Project STOP. So one last thing before we get started is just a quick bit of housekeeping and to familiarize ourselves with the software. First of all, you've all been placed on mute for the duration of this webinar, but if at any point you have any questions, please feel free to use the question function There will also be an opportunity at the end for a Q&A session, and I'll be taking questions at that time. The webinar will also be recorded, so if you missed anything or know any colleagues of yours who maybe didn't have a chance to join us today, the webinar will be made available afterwards. And one last thing, there'll be an interactive portion of the webinar where we'll be asking a question of the audience. So at that time, please feel free to use the chat function to answer the question. So thank you everyone once again, and Wendy, take it away.
Thank you so much, Erin. And thank you everybody who's joined the call today. On behalf of the panel, I want to thank you for your interest in this important responsible care topic. I became involved in the project, Project STOP, through my own relationship with responsible care. Prior to joining NOVA, I had worked in the healthcare industry, and in that space, I was really quite involved with issues related in the United States to the high rate of medical errors while people receive medical treatment. And what attracted me to responsible care when I joined NOVA was the role that responsible care plays not only in preventing error, but accelerating change in many areas, particularly in change like the topic that we're about to talk about today. So the creation of responsible care more than 30 years, it set a trajectory for our industry to make really important progress across meaningful ambitions in health, safety, environment, and security. So when looked through a lens, as you see a Nova Chemicals lens like you see up here on the screen, we anchor ourselves, when we think about sustainability, we anchor ourselves to our roots in 1985 when we became a founding member. And I'd invite you to draw your eyes across the screen, because you can see our journey in responsible care continues to this present day, and our connection in 2018 to both becoming a strategic partner of Project STOP and a founding member of the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. So as we begin, what I'd like to ask you to do is place what we're about to talk about today into the context of responsible care and how important that is to our industry in fulfilling the long-standing commitments it has made to bettering society, the environment, and economies. The purpose at Nova Chemicals is really pretty straightforward. We view our purpose as shaping a better world, and we see ourselves as part of a community of global stakeholders like many of you on the call today, and we appreciate the importance of the role that business like ours and yours can play in being a catalyst for important and significant change. Our relationship to Project STOP and the Alliance to End Plastic Waste are just some of the ways that we hope to help to advance the plastic circular economy, to care for the climate, and to eliminate plastic waste in the ocean. I'm going to ask you next to really have a close look at this image of what you see on the screen. This image was pivotal for us and a game changer as we began our relationship with Project STOP. With your eyes see the pollution in the environment. What we don't experience in the comfort of our homes or in our offices are some of the other sensory experiences. Imagine, if you will, if you were there, what you might smell if you were that young girl walking across the beach. Imagine the smell of that waste, the smell of that waste burning, that uncollected waste, and think about it, what it feels like for her to be walking on layers and layers of uncollected waste instead of having her feet walking in the sand. But most of all, we can only begin to sense the impact on the people that live in this community. Their economy, the impact on fisheries, tourism, health, and most of all, on human dignity. So let's turn our attention then to what can we do to address this, to prevent this, and to play a role, each of us individually and collectively, to ensure that the value of plastic remains in use and not in the environment. What you see on the screen here are some of the waste dynamics in Indonesia. Let's take a closer look. You can see here that 39% of the waste, only 39% is collected. And in April of this year, the Global Plastic Action Partnership released a significant study. Now, what we want to think about when we think about 39% of the waste being collected, you know, this is a nation of 267 million people. Let's put that in a North American context. In North America, in the US, there are 328 million people, and in Canada, 37 million people. So imagine the communities in the US or Canada where only 39% of the waste is collected. So for Indonesia, that means 40 million tons of waste is leaking into the environment each year. And we know that 6.8 million tons of that is plastic waste per year. And it's a figure that's expected to grow by 5% a year. So even with the current commitments from government and industry, civil society, plastic waste is projected to enter Indonesia's water bodies at a rate of 800,000 tons by the year 2025. And to put this in perspective, Indonesia's coming in from behind. When they are evaluated against peer countries, their uncollected waste, their collection levels are 1.5 times lower than other countries. So let's shift our attention to the right to some more hopeful aspirations. The Indonesian national government has set several ambitious targets. The president's commitment to reducing ocean plastic by 70% by 2025 frames their commitments. They also intend to double waste collection in that same time at a rate going from 39% to 80% being collected by just 2025. And the dream, the goal, the ambition is that by 2040, Indonesia will have achieved a plastic pollution-free Indonesia that embodies the principles of a circular economy. So let's take a closer look at these waste dynamics on the next slide. Let's remember, looking at the yellow bar on the left, 61% of that volume of waste is going uncollected. And in the bar to the right of it, you see that 6.8 million tons is plastic waste entering the environment. And what you see here in the left then are the many different ways, the pathways that this plastic waste is ending up in the environment through direct dumping into the water, into the land, and open burning in the absence of sustainable waste management systems. Then over on to the right, if I could call your attention, you see that 76% of environmental leakage is from small, medium, and remote cities. And so the various archetypes, the mega, the medium, rural, remote, they all dictate different strategies and structures for how to go about this work. And that's some of the expertise that Systemic brings to the work that they do. So what is important is different regions will and different archetypes require entirely different sustainable changes. So next we're going to look at one more page of analysis. And what you see on the left is really, this is what business as usual is going to look like. If we don't do anything and we let 39% only of waste be collected, this is what business as usual is going to look like. But if we want to support a 2040 aim where Indonesia is plastic free and embodying the principles of a plastic economy, What we're here to talk about is the bar on collection and recycling. Improved collection and recycling play an extremely critical role in the system change scenario on the right. And Joy's going to tell us more about the progress and the challenges in developing those system change scenarios. But before we do that, we need to tell you just a little bit more about Project STOP itself. So please give me a minute to do that. So Project STOP, as Aaron said, was co-created in just 2017 by Systemic. And Systemic is a firm who focuses on system change to help us accelerate and realize the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And it was co-created by Borealis, a polyolefins producer based in Vienna. Together, they co-created this and launched it in 2018. So you see on the far left, the core objectives are to focus on waste leakage, increased recycling of plastics, while creating socioeconomic benefits leading to economic sustainability. What makes STOP different from a success factors lens, however, is not just its strategy. The approach is actually to put a team of people in for a multi-year period, at least 2 to 3 years. And they work to implement new waste systems with local government and with the communities before it is handed over. And before it is ever handed over, it's been studied, it's been piloted, it's been tested before it becomes institutionalized. In that way, real-time learning can be applied to other cities and other archetypes as we go. So in the box on the right, you begin to see some of the immediate rewards of just 2 years of Project STOP being operationalized in terms of people receiving waste collection, many of them for the very first time. You see the significant diversion of waste for recycling or for a safe disposal instead of burning and ending up in the environment. You see job creation, just to name a few of the significant impacts in just a small amount of time. But we can't do this alone. We can't do it just with Systemic and their hard work. On the slide here, we want to give a shout out to the diversity of public and private sector partners that you see here on the screen who are working together to address these significant challenges. And before I turn it over to Joy, just a couple of other things. A moment ago, I mentioned the team's approach to working with local government and community. I ask you to just take a look at the many images that you see here on the screen. You begin to see the multifaceted approach to working with people, communities, government, in order to establish waste governance systems, to enable behavior change at the household level, to create systems that work and sustainable revenue streams to tackle these really challenging waste dynamics. Here on the next slide, we simply want you to have an impression of where we operate in Indonesia. Project STOP is operating in these 3 cities, Munclar, Pasuruan, and Jembrana. You're going to hear more about Jembrana here in a minute, which is aligned with the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. And on the next slide, we simply want you to have an impression of the process and progress on the next slide that each of the cities goes through. So you can see on the left, starting with exploration and going through study phases, including pilots and increased phases of implementation before going on to roll up. So Munclar is furthest along in the timeline, as you can see here, with it being the first city that got started. And it's exciting to tell you that now 70% of households in Munclar have waste collection most of which who didn't have it in the past. Other exciting news to share with you, especially even in the context of the challenges of COVID that we've all faced in the last 6 months, Project STOP has 3 material recovery systems that are under construction right now and scheduled to be completed this year. 2 of them are in Pasuruan, and the 3rd one is in Jembrana. All are expected to be completed this year and help enable rapid collection and scale-up efforts that's like you see here at the far end of the scale. So here's where I'd like to turn it over to Joy, and Joy will share more of the insights and challenges around creating economically sustainable waste management systems in this region. Thank you.
Oh, Joy, you might want to unmute yourself.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Wendy, and thank you, everyone else. It is such an honor to be here and to talk about something that, a topic that I'm incredibly passionate about. I'm a partner at Systemic and the program director for Project STOP. But before that, I started in about 2014 trying to solve this issue, first at McKinsey and then the Ocean Conservancy. And I thought we were doing great work, and I think we were. But when I stood on that beach that Wendy mentioned and talked about, something woke up in me that said, you know, there needs to be more. And so I convinced my partner and I to move to Indonesia to actually work on the front line and see if we could actually make a real difference. And so Project STOP is one of the projects that's resulted from that. I wanted to take this time, I think Wendy did a wonderful introduction of Project STOP, so I wanted to take this time to talk about the larger issue of why waste collection is so low in Indonesia. And as Wendy mentioned, Indonesia is a country of 267 million people. It's the 4th largest country by population in the world. And to have 61% of the population, or 165 million people, without waste collection, that results in 40 million tons going into the environment every year. This comes with huge consequences. And you know, the stark fact is that the problem of plastic leakage and plastic pollution is growing faster than our ability to solve it. And so while we started Project STOP to really focus on the front line and to make sure that at least in, you know, region by region, everything was actually collected and nothing was going into the environment. When you're working at a scale of 165 million people, we can't just go, you know, sort of region by region. We also have to go top down. And one of the really wonderful things about Project STOP is it has given my team and I really good insight on what the structural root cause constraints are behind these very low waste collection levels. And we have them sort of outlined, 5 of them here, and I'll just go through them very quickly, and then I want to spend time on the 5th. So the first is decentralized and fragmented governance and accountability. And so the way that waste is managed in Indonesia broadly, and obviously there's a lot more depth and detail behind all of these, but broadly it's a very decentralized system. So you have waste responsibility in communities of like 2,000 people. Inadequate waste system funding. Generally waste costs between, at least in Indonesia, about $16 to $18 per person, and the Indonesian government is spending less than $1. So you just have a very large gap there. Institutional and technical capacity. So even if you have the resources and you have good governance, you have to know how to actually set up and operate waste systems in an efficient, effective manner. The 4th is inadequate waste management planning at district level. And this is really about having a strategy and sticking to that strategy. And the 5th, limited options to monetize waste. What this is about is there's really few options to recycle and process waste that generate a revenue that's higher than the cost of actual production. And I want to focus on this one in particular because many of us on the call are connected to the plastic circular economy. And I want to just show how even though we all want this to happen, I mean, it makes a lot of sense to have a circular economy, but on the front line, there is a pretty significant gap that needs to be solved for before we can really make the idea of a circular economy into more than just a theory, but a real reality on the ground. So I'm going to start by just asking a question. So this does, I am asking for a little bit of audience participation. So this is a truck of flexible plastic, flexible being things like carrier plastic bags and sachets and wrappers for items. How much do you think will be the revenue from this sales? And imagine that this truck is over 10 feet high and quite long as well. So so in your chat function, please just put a guess. And the chat function is on the square.
So we got $1 from Nicole. I'm going to say $10. We have $0, $5, $100.
Okay. And so while we're getting some answers, I'm just going to talk to you about the process to actually make this load of plastic, so give you a little bit of a sense. So when the plastic comes in, it has to be sorted on conveyor belts into, we do about 20 categories. And then once it gets to a certain amount of volume, then it's pressed into a bale, like into a square, where it's then weighed, it's stacked. Then there's negotiations with various buyers. And then the buyers either come or we pack it into a truck. Again, it's weighed again, and then it has to be driven about 8 hours to the nearest recycling area. So there's quite a bit of cost along that chain. So that should hopefully give you like some sense of what goes into it. And I wish I could see the.
So we have quite a range here, Joy. We got everything from $0 to $100. We got minus $100. We have $20, $8, $150. Okay. Going once, going twice.
Okay, so the actual cost. Thank you for the participation. The actual cost is $100. Okay. You think about how much time, equipment, energy, etc. goes into just one load, and to only have a payoff of $100 revenue, including all of the logistics and everything else, it's not sustainable for the cost that goes into it, and that's one of the challenges that we need to solve. And so I think we all want to move to a waste collection system that's not just collect to landfill, because these materials have value. But I just wanted to quickly talk about what it takes in order to make a circular waste system. So it's all about sortation, and you have to start at the household level. And so we do a very simple sorting process of just organic versus non-organic. We have specialized collection vehicles. They're basically tricycles, so sort of motorcycles with trailers on the back of them, with a section for non-organics and another section for organics. Once they come, they go into a material recovery facility, which you can see on the bottom left. And this is where the waste is actually sorted into different categories. And you can see on the right some examples of conveyor belts and many workers that are working alongside it. Then it's pressed and then sort of loaded and transported. So you can imagine there's quite a bit more expense and more complexity to actually make a circular economy possible. Now, the other challenge we have is that in many lower income cities, your waste composition looks like this. And so you have, and this is just the plastic composition. So you have almost 90% of the plastic that's coming in is flexible plastics. So this is like your plastic carrier bags, metallized sachets, clear polypropylene film or polyethylene film. So that's making up, almost 90% of your plastic. And then you have some rigid plastic, which would be things like your water bottles and other sort of rigid containers. But the challenge with that is that it's quite expensive to process flexible plastics. So let me let me take you through this chart. This looks a little complicated at first, but on the left-hand side is the revenue for one of our cities, and on the right side is the cost. So on the revenue side of the equation, the largest proportion of our revenue comes from household fees. So we charge each household 75 cents per month to do collection 3 times per week. And that's the largest. And then we also have village support. So 25% of the revenue is from recycling, from the actual sales of the materials. And of that, about 20% of the 100% is from the sale of plastics for recycling. But then when we look at our cost, a full 50% comes from the recycling process. So we get 25% of our revenue, but it costs us 50%. So it costs us twice as much to actually sort the waste than the value that we get from it. And this is a real problem because while we're here, we can make the economics work and we can sort of subsidize the cost of recycling from the households and from the village support, which is basically government support. But as soon as we leave, what often happens is that the higher valuable recyclables, your rigid bottles and that sort of thing, continue to be recycled, but everything else is either burnt or brought to landfill. And so if we really want to solve the plastic challenge, we need to solve for that. This is why it's more expensive. So we talked about this rigid to flexible plastic equation, and the flexible plastics, again, is about 90%. The challenge is that it costs us 3 times as much to sort flexible plastics as rigid plastics. Because if you think about it, rigid plastics are heavier and they're generally larger than your flexible plastics. So there's just a lot more hand movement, it takes a lot more time. The transportation is exactly the same. But then when we compare that to the revenue received, and if you look at the first sort of bar on each of these sides, we get approximately, and this is from a blended mix of, let's say, rigid and a blended mix of flexibles, but we get about $270 per ton for the rigid plastics and $133 for the flexible plastics. So again, it costs us 3 times more to sort the flexibles, and we get half as much revenue. And yet it's 90% of the volume of the plastics that we get in these lower income cities, which are the ones that are doing the most pollution into the environment. This has been compounded even more with the impact of COVID. So COVID has put a lot of pressure on markets, far beyond just, plastic recycling. But in our Indonesian context, it's reduced the cost of, or the cost that buyers are willing to pay for flexible plastics, 20%, and 40% for rigid plastics. So it's a huge impact. At the same time, the government fees, that village fees, is about 20% of the revenue. That has all dropped because the government has refocused their efforts on COVID. And so one of the first places they cut is waste management, which is not seen as much of an essential service as things like healthcare and education. So what does all of this mean? Is that if we really truly want a circular plastic economy to be viable long term, that we have to have the revenue from those materials high enough to actually subsidize the cost of what it takes to sort them. And we estimate that cost to be between $70 and $95, or let's say 90 to 100 if you're just looking at the plastic component. So that's the gap that we see at an operating level within Indonesia. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of insight into one of several constraints that we have in Indonesia to really make a circular economy viable. I'm going to hand it over to Julianne to talk about Jembrana.
Oh, thanks, Joy. I'm excited to share with everyone today the newest city that Wendy talked about, Project Stop Jembrana. And this one is particularly exciting for me because it brings together 2 amazing organizations that I've had the privilege of working with for the past few years. I was NOVA's first steering committee member for Project STOP, and you heard in the introductions, Wendy is now sitting in that role for us here at NOVA. And one of my ongoing focuses in my current role is being the liaison and coordinator for NOVA with the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. I'm the current alternate delegate and advisor to our board member and also our senior staff who work on the many working teams within the Alliance. So Project STOP Jembrana. This city is located in northwest Bali, Indonesia. The goal here is to establish the Regency's first ever solid waste management service with a full recycling system that will create new and permanent jobs. The Alliance and Project STOP will create a system that aims to collect 20,000 tons of waste per year. And this will involve a radical transformation, as you heard both from Wendy and Joy talk about at every societal level, citizen, government, and community. So let's talk about why Jembrana. Bali is a very important tourism area for Indonesia, and the Balinese province of Jembrana was chosen because it is one of Bali's 15 highest priority cities for solving plastic leakage into the ocean, as you can see here from this heat map, which shows the hotspots for mismanaged waste. Jembrana also has one of the 3 largest watersheds on Bali, and it also has one of the 5 main ocean plastic leakage river systems. And Jembrana is home to about 160,000 people that have the limited plastic waste management system today. So typically in Jembrana, 61%, and it's kind of interesting, in the earlier slide you saw 61% of waste was entering to the environment, and this study showed the same 61% of waste entering the environment. And over half of the people shared that they burn their waste. And in contrast, only 12% said that they had a regular access to a formal waste collection. But look at the picture on this slide, and you can see the overflow of discarded waste that's running down the hillside into the waterway. When you don't have access to a waste system, then you really don't have any good choices for your waste. Burning or throwing waste into the environment are the only ones, and quite frankly, the least expensive alternatives for citizens there. But the good news is on the right-hand side, you can see 85% of respondents told us that they want to participate in a formal garbage collection program. And this is one of the highest rates of interest seen to date in the country, and that's incredibly encouraging for us. So as Wendy and Joy have shared with the other 2 city projects, Project STOP with the Alliance are following an outlined process that explores the same exploration, preparation, design work, and then phased implementation. Baseline studies were conducted in waste characterization, plastic leakage, social mapping, recycling infrastructure, and the goal here is to work with those key stakeholders that include local government, people to customize an approach that will work specifically for them and their needs in their local region. Phase 1 implementation then would include testing collection and sorting practices, mapping recycling markets, building relationships with buyers, testing consumer behavior programs, what messaging is working, what methodologies are helping them recycle more, and how do we get people more excited about participating in this program. So on the next slide, I'm going to ask Joy to join us back and share some initial insights on what we've learned from the Jembrana project to date.
Thank you, Julianne. It's really fun to talk about Jembrana because even though we're at only pilot stage, it's been very successful. I think it's our 3rd city, so we've been learning and learning as we go along. So when we go into a city, there's 4 different types of behavior we're trying to change. So one is to stop burning and dumping the waste. The second is to actually use the waste system that's in place. The third is to pay for that waste system. And again, the alternative is absolutely free, and there's really no social consequences to burning or dumping. And then the 4th is not only to just pay, but also to separate the waste into organic and non-organic. And I'm really, really happy to say that so far, and again, we're just at pilot stage, but so far, 100% of the households are participating. 100% are paying for the waste system, which normally it's between 70 to 80%, so that's wonderful. And in an unprecedented way, we're having 97% sort the waste. And you can see a picture on the left of an example of sort of what the tricycles come in looking like. So we have, very clean organic on the right and quite, fairly clean non-organic on the left. And also, obviously our no burning and otherwise dumping stats are very good as well. So really excited about the progress to date, and we're expecting some drop as we actually go to thousands and thousands and thousands of households, but we should have a pretty high clean waste rate and participation in the program, which is wonderful. And so handing it back to you.
Thanks, Joy. So on this slide, you can see there's photos of the current construction of the MRF that's in Jembrana. This MRF will manage about 50 tons of waste per day. It's co-located right next to the landfill. And the expectation is construction should be finished November, December this year with a large scale rollout. So for Jembrana, some of the next steps are to finish this specific MRF collection later this year. And then they'll be rolling out the formal waste collection program and then piloting the new governance system for when the city will take over the reins and oversee and run the waste management system. And this is one when you look at the whole picture of why the Alliance chose to support a new waste system in Jembrana. It's really looking at empowering the local community to collect, sort, and sell their own plastic waste. This self-sufficient system will not only provide jobs in the community, but it'll also rid over 150,000 residents of their waste and prevent 1,500 tons of plastic waste from leaking into the environment every year. So this project pioneered a powerful approach to building sustainable waste collection, sorting, and recycling system in an urban setting where none had previously existed. So we've talked a little bit about Jembrana being a joint effort between Project STOP and the Alliance to End Plastic Waste. And I wanted to just take a few minutes to introduce the Alliance to you. But I am hoping that most of you on the call have actually heard about the Alliance. It was founded in January of 2019 with close to about 30 founding member companies from across the plastic supply chain. And as Wendy mentioned, that includes us here at Nova Chemicals. These companies came together to build an organization focused on cross-value chain collaboration that drives complete systems change in the management of plastics. So today, on the next slide, you can see the number of companies has more than doubled, and the Alliance has 47 member companies. And they come from all regions of the world across the plastics value chain. And this unique mix of members allows the ability to address the challenges globally of plastic pollution, and it's a coordinated and transformative way. The Alliance welcomes all companies, big, small, from all regions and all sectors to support this effort. So the rising tide of plastic waste is a global challenge, as we've all been talking about today. But as Joy mentioned, the problem is only worsening. As the global middle class expands, demand for this unique material and the benefits it brings for health, hygiene, convenience, and efficiency will double between 2020 and 2040, while the volume of unmanaged plastic waste is forecasted to triple. In response, the world has seen a proliferation of initiatives to manage the challenges. Some focus policy development, raising awareness, thought leadership. Others encourage organizations to make public pledges and bold commitments. Many small-scale pilot projects are working at a local level as well. But there is recognition, as you can see from this slide in one of the trends, that no single organization can solve the problem of plastic waste. Public goods challenges of this type demand a collective approach, all stakeholders working together towards the common goal. What's more, the problem will never be fully addressed by working on just one part of the plastic value chain. So with this in mind, the Alliance to End Plastic Waste is bringing a systems approach by collaborating across the plastics value chain and among key companies in every sector, and working with governments, local communities, environment, and conservation groups who are already working on these challenges, and they're looking to harness new ideas, bring new ways of thinking to the table, invest in new solutions, and demonstrate new business models. The Alliance wants to address the gaps that are holding back a circular economy for plastics. For example, in less developed economies, like we just talked about with Jembrana and the other 2 cities, they're building the missing systems and infrastructure needed to capture and collect waste. But they're also investing into advanced recycling and recycling technologies that can replace landfill and incineration. Just as important, their work is focused on improving product design, stimulating demand for recyclates to unlock the value of recycled plastic, and changing consumer behavior. And everything they do, they want to have their capital be catalytic, aiming to be pathfinders, demonstrating new solutions that are economically self-sustaining, locally owned, and that can be scaled and replicated by others. So if you think about it, their strategy is really built upon key principles, and I'll share those 3. Plastic waste is a valuable resource that should not be discarded, but put to better use. Ending plastic waste in the environment can enable economic opportunity, and collaboration with government, communities, NGOs, and academics is essential to success. So on the last slide, I just wanted to share that when I think of the Alliance, I sum it up with global thinking with local action. And they've been making progress since their launch in 2019. And some of the key milestones are included on this slide. The 2 that I'd like to highlight today: member companies are putting money on the line to solve this problem. The initial target was to raise $1.5 billion over 5 years, and they have already committed with $1 billion from their member companies. And under the direction of the member CEOs, the Alliance is investing into those new ideas and solutions that we just talked about to tackle the problem. And just recently, the Alliance published their 2020 progress report, and it's called "It All Starts with Collaboration." This outlines the commitment to their project acceleration across their 4 strategic pillars, and they are waste management and recycling infrastructure, innovation, education and engagement, and cleanup. The Alliance has activated 14 projects across 14 cities in 6 countries in Southeast Asia, India, and Africa, all of the front line of the plastic waste challenge. And the report also features 55 member-led projects that are worth about $400 million towards building those solutions to end plastic waste in the environment. So I encourage everyone, if you get a chance, go out to the Alliance website. It's endplasticwaste.org. Download and read the report. Beautiful photography, beautiful pictures, and near and dear to our heart, Project Stop Jembrana is one of those project milestones that are highlighted there. So with that, on the last, we would just like to extend a big thanks on behalf of myself, Wendy, and Joy. We really appreciate the opportunity from CIAC and each of you to let us come and talk to you about the progress and these exciting opportunities and projects that are helping us all to end plastic waste in our environment. So Aaron, turning it back to you.
Thanks, Julianne, and thank you so much, Wendy, Joy, and Julianne. It's quite clear what an enormous challenge the 3 of you are working on, and it's been quite incredible to hear about it today, and see what you and Project Stop really have been able to achieve in such a small amount of time, in terms of the massive change here on the system level, on the socioeconomic level, and even on the behavioral level. So I guess it's really inspiring to see how you've been able to empower the local people, the local communities and governments to build that capacity for system change, and ultimately to improve the quality of life for the people of Jembrana, Muncar, and Pasuruan. So what I want to do now is dig into a couple of questions. So we're going to remain on mute for the Q&A session, but if you want to ask a question to any of the panelists, please feel free to type it in the question tab. And while we're giving people a moment to write out and to think about their questions, I'll start us off with one. You talked earlier about expansion, and it's clear that there's really some in-depth experience and knowledge that you've cultivated throughout your time on this project and within this local context. So what are you doing to ensure that the findings and the lessons learned that you've been able to take are not only institutionalized so you can build that capacity for it to carry on, but also from a sort of knowledge translation perspective so that other countries and other cities can learn from what you've done?
Thanks, Aaron. maybe I'll start with this one. So we realized that like working on the front line, it has a tremendous impact for the people who live there. But like you said, there's so much insight that can be shared much more broadly. So we're working on that in a few different levels. So one is we've started codifying all of the lessons learned and actually creating sort of modules to teach others on all of the sort of operational and behavior change and governance and sort of policy and regulatory insights that we've generated along the way. We also participate in several, let's say, national forums. So for example, a lot of the research that Wendy started off with was through the NPAP process, the National Plastics Action Partnership. That's through a partnership between the World Economic Forum and the Indonesian government. So we're on the policy task force and the financing task force and the behavior change and the impact metrics task force. So we're making sure that we're funneling these insights through to decision makers within the private sector as well as with national governments. Our project, we didn't mention this, but our project has an MOU with the Ministry of Environment and Forestry. And so we're doing a lot with them in particular, but also many of the other ministries to work on a lot of these structural changes that are needed, that we think that are needed to really free up the system to work in a more sort of effective and efficient way.
That's really great, Joy. It's clearly very important work that needs to be compiled so that other people can have a chance to take from it and apply it to their own contexts. We have a question from Sarah in regard to the situation because of COVID. Have we seen ongoing commitments from the early Project Stop cities to maintain the system, especially in today's post-COVID economy? Are the municipal mayors committed?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So yes, very strong commitment, but not for the full system. And this is where it gets quite dangerous, and this is why one of the reasons I brought up the challenge with recycling plastics and other materials. So as you guys saw, the fee that we can get from households covers the cost of collecting the waste and bringing it to landfill. But it's not enough to actually cover the cost of recycling. And the government funds have been frozen because they've had to be redirected to work on COVID issues. And so what they've said is let's scale back the recycling efforts. And so it means that some of the sortation workers have had to be on sort of a leave of absence for a while until we can bring it back up again, until we get those government funds, etc. And it also means that the system is operating at a loss, which means that it's taking, so part of the system revenues is for replacement of equipment and that sort of thing. And so it's kind of eating into that replacement fund. So yes, there's a lot of commitment, but we have to figure out the financing so that it's not so fragile. We're making it work, but it feels like with sort of duct tape.
Yeah, it sounds like there's quite a lot of constraints, but I guess that's sort of the way it is these days for everyone because of COVID. A question from Danielle: what other locations are under consideration as Project Stop looks to eventually scale up their work? And I guess as a follow-up to that, is COVID kind of hampering any of those plans?
So I can't talk specifically about locations, but I will say that we are looking at expanding and quite significantly. All of the expansions will be in Indonesia for now. We really want to see if we can focus deeply on one country and tackle it from many different levels. So, from national, provincial, regency, very localized, if we can actually get it to a tipping point. So yes, we're hoping, and we are right now looking at other cities and conducting feasibility studies for those cities. but they will be in Indonesia and most likely Java and Bali based.
Oh, that's really exciting to hear. Julianne, I have a question for that may perhaps you could tackle. What other kinds of projects does the Alliance to End Plastic Waste fund? What other kind of work is being done?
The Alliance is working, as I said, on those 4 strategic pillars in those 4 areas. So they're really looking at engaging cities and looking at the recycling and recovery infrastructure in mostly high leakage geographies, which they are considering Southeast Asia, India, Africa. They also look at the cleanup, so they will do small portions for cleanup, but they're also really looking at innovation and how we can look at innovative technologies and ways that we can solve towards a circular economy. There are specific projects that you can learn more about in the progress report that I talked about, where it starts with collaboration. So I encourage to go out and hear about all of the innovation projects like Plug and Play, Renew Ganges. There's a lot of different projects, which I think we don't have enough time for me to go through all of them. So I encourage you to go read the report.
Yeah, the Alliance is certainly doing some neat stuff, and our association is excited to be getting more and more involved with them. So I would encourage everyone to check that out too. A question for the panel from Elena around work being done with environmental NGOs. Are global NGOs and environmental NGOs engaging in a positive way to reinforce the approaches and systems that are being put in place here?
I can start by saying I think everybody has the same goal in mind. And so in the spirit of creating a global world that ends plastic waste, we're all right there, we're all aligned. I think some of the questions and conversations and areas where we're needing to collaborate is what are the best ways to do it? As Joy, Wendy, and I kind of shared in our talk today, there's no silver bullet that's out there. And there needs to be a lot more education from all of our parts, industries, NGOs, the scientists, just as Joy said, learning from the communities themselves and governments. We all have to work together to figure out what are those gaps, what are those problems, and then work together to solve. So the answer that I would say is yes, definitely. Now, do we agree on everything and all of the approaches? No, but I think I've been pleasantly surprised that we've all been moving in the direction to solve the problem.
Thank you. And I'll quickly build on that and also echo a yes, that we agree on the same ends and not necessarily sometimes on the means to get to the ends. But one of the things that I've had the privilege to be a part of and that I could share back with this group as an observation is really in private meetings and conversations, really earnest listening and learning among various partners because of the very strong commitment of really solving these challenges.
And maybe just from my side, from the front line, something that we're doing in Jembrana, it's the first time we've done it, so it's a bit of an experiment, but we're actually tendering out some of the pieces of the work. So instead of the Project Stop team doing all pieces of the waste system, we're tendering out the cleanup work and the behavior change work, for example, and a few other pieces, because there's some amazing local NGOs who are really wonderful at doing some of these pieces, and so we can bring them to these areas of that need tremendous help and all work together to really solve this, which is really neat. And so far, I mean, you guys have seen, I talked about the behavior change results, for example, and that's with a partnership with an NGO, a local NGO, which is really wonderful. So.
Okay, well, thank you, Joy, Wendy, and Julianne. Those are some great responses, and it was a great conversation. we're going to have to, we're coming to the end of the hour here, so we're going to have to wrap up. And as we do, I just kind of wanted to flip over to talk about some of the ways that our industry and you can get involved. There is a website you can go to called gettingplasticsright.ca, and there's all sorts of information there and ideas of different steps that need to be taken here in Canada to tackle plastic pollution and to build a circular economy for plastics here in Canada. And there's more information there on the approaches that industry is taking and our goals and some of the programs and infrastructure ideas that we need to build. And you can also use the website to write a letter to your local federal member of parliament to let them know about your concerns about plastic pollution and what Canada needs to do to deal with plastic waste. So if you can take a moment and go to gettingplasticsright.ca, you can take an action there to connect with your elected representatives. So lots of opportunities for engagement here in Canada. And finally, next up on our Responsible Care webinar series is the Trans Care Safety Train, where we will have the opportunity to hear from Andy Ash and Jean-Pierre Couture of the Rail Association of Canada. And in this webinar, we'll virtually tour the CCPX 911 tank car and learn about the new virtual reality training program and tools that are being used to promote railway safety and ensure the safe transportation of dangerous goods in Canada. So this webinar will be on November 5th at 1 p.m. And so stay tuned for details on registration. And that's it for today. Thank you one last time to our wonderful speakers for the great conversation. And thank you to the audience for joining us and for participating with us. Please feel free to follow us on Twitter or visit our website at canadianchemistry.ca. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.